Britain is poorer than every state in America. Did you hear about this?
Americans are so much richer than the British. Why?
Poorer than Mississippi. That is where Britain ranks when you line it up against every American state. Not 7th, not 20th, dead last. Below every single state in a country that Europeans have spent decades calling uncultured and overindulgent and excessive. Today we are looking at the numbers, and the numbers do not lie.
Britain is poorer than every state in America. Did you hear about this? This news is going viral, and I too am surprised to hear it. I'm a Brit. I've been living in America for 10 years. People were thinking, or British people were thinking, that actually Britain probably ranks, if it was a state in America, maybe the 7th richest state in America is how they would see Britain in it. No, the GDP per capita ranks Britain as below 50 in terms of state, poorer than Mississippi. Britain is poorer than every US state. That comes as a huge surprise to me, but it gives credence to the reason why I'm here in the first place, which is the abundance of opportunity.
Americans are so much richer than the British. Why? I'm a money reporter for The Times. I've lived in both London and New York. Here are 4 things that I've noticed. Americans have a love affair with the stock market, while Brits see it as a sure way to go to rack and ruin and prefer to stash the cash. Ultimately though, this just means they lose money to inflation. In the UK, owning a home is seen as the most important financial milestone. Property makes up 40% of UK household wealth, whereas in the US, that's closer to 20%. However, even if your home rises in value, that doesn't immediately give you cash to spend. Americans will willingly discuss how their 401k is looking, but it's a miracle if you can even get a Brit to log into their pension. Contrary to popular belief, the US social security system is also more generous than the UK state pension. Income tax is much lower in the US. Its top rate band kicks in at just over $600,000. Compare that to £125,000 in the UK. Then there's inheritance tax, which is only charged on estates over 15 million in the US, compared to £500,000 in the UK.
A British woman, living in America, breaking down the salary difference between the two countries in a way that will make every American look at their paycheck differently. The same job, the same company, $200,000 in America, £65,000 in the UK. That is not a small gap. That is the difference between building a life and surviving one. And it gets deeper than just the salary. A British man, who has lived in both London and New York, about to say something that every young British person needs to hear.
One thing I've learned, having lived in the US and the UK, is that the American dream is real, but the British dream does not exist. I was shocked to learn that the average salary of a student coming out of university here is 30 to 36k pounds, which if you convert to US dollars is only 50k, whereas in the US it's around 80k. And I myself was making 6 figures coming out of college. But the reason why I say the American dream exists and the British dream is not real is because even if you're making less than 6 figures in the US, at least you have line of sight or progression to achieve that eventually, even if you're a truck driver or work at a retail store like Target or Walmart. Whereas in the UK, I've seen people work at the same company for 15 to 20 years and not even get to 2/3 of 100k. But even if your salary increases here in the UK, you're just getting taxed even more. So you're not actually taking home any of the money that you've made. And that's the problem in the UK.
A system that does not reward hard work. Said by a British man who moved to America and discovered what it feels like to live in a country that does. And that word, reward, is the key to everything this video is about. If you are still watching this and you have not hit subscribe yet, I respect your dedication to being difficult, but hit the button. Every day on this channel, we are pulling back the curtain on what the world really thinks about America. Not what the media says, not what the headlines push. So subscribe, and do not miss what is coming next. Now let me show you the moment that breaks every British person who discovers American housing prices for the first time. A British woman, comparing houses. Same price, Two completely different worlds.
Does anybody in the USA want to adopt me as soon as possible? Because look at the price of an American house versus a British house. This is an average house in England. 400,000, 3 bedrooms, semi-detached. Look at it. It's nothing special. But then you have a look at the American houses for the same price. This is pretty much the exact same price. Look at it. Detached. 4 bedrooms, and look at the size of that. If that house was in the UK, it would be worth millions. So why is it that Americans practically have palaces for houses? Every time I've seen an American on my For You page, they have got a mansion. They've got the stairs that, you know, take up the whole hallway. It's luxurious. What are we doing in the UK? What are we doing? You can barely get a house here. You have to live in a cardboard box for your first house. Can't wrap my head around the fact that Americans are getting a house of that size and that look for £400,000.
A cardboard box. That is how she describes what £400,000 buys you in the UK. In America, the same money buys you 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a walk-in closet, a backyard, and Americans walk past those houses every single day without thinking twice about it. And then there is this. A British woman moving to Texas who cannot believe what she is about to discover about American house prices.
One of the biggest culture shocks since moving to Texas from the UK is the size of the houses over here. We went to look at some new builds recently, and honestly, what you would pay for a 2-bedroom flat back where I'm from, you can get a 4-bedroom house with a hell of a lot more space here. All the houses we saw were all pretty similar in terms of the living area layout, where it's an open plan kitchen, dining and living space. They also all had 2-car garages and master bedrooms with en-suites and walk-in closets, and separate laundry rooms with space for a washer and a dryer. This first house that we saw was a 1-storey and had 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. When you first walked in, it had the laundry room and the door to the garage at the front. Then just down the corridor to the left,
$180,000. 4 bedrooms, a garage, a yard, and a games room upstairs. In the UK, $180,000 buys you a deposit, if you are lucky. Now here is the part that Americans need to hear most. A man who left his country and came to America with nothing. 3 months. He arrived with nothing. No job, no plan, just a dream he had abandoned 10 years earlier. 3 months later, he is on television. That is not luck. That is America doing what America does when someone shows up ready to work. And this is the one that explains everything. A British man who figured out the real reason Americans are wealthier. It is not just the salaries. It is not just the house prices.
As a
It is something
British guy,
deeper.
there is one thing that Americans have that we don't. In America, people have ambition. When you start doing well in America, people support you. When you start doing well in the UK, people try and humble you. People in the UK, they don't like talking about success and they don't like supporting their friends. In America, you can bet your bottom dollar most people are going to support you. They're going to big you up. They're going to give you ideas. They're going to try and help you. In the UK, it's completely the opposite. Everybody wants to try and bring you down a peg. Nobody wants to see you succeed. And I don't get it. There's enough wealth to go around for everybody. Helping somebody else will always help you in the long run. And I feel like Americans know this. Americans know that there is such thing as good karma and such thing as bad karma. So be nice to everyone. Help your friend if they're trying to make a business. Stop being a bar humbug. People from the UK, yeah? I'm looking at you right now. Learn from the Americans. Be more American. Be more ambitious. Be more, let's go and get after it. Instead of being like, nah, you're not doing it right. Nah, you're too big for your boots. Nah. Nobody likes people like that. Yeah? No one.
Have you ever wondered why the US salaries are much higher than the UK salaries for the exact same jobs? Let me explain this one really quickly. Hi, I'm Farah. I'm an accountant now teaching personal finance, so you don't have to pay for it. At number one, you got the size of the economy. The US economy is simply much bigger than the UK, and there's more money, more companies, and more competition for talent, which means companies are willing to pay more to attract the best people. And number two, you got the cost of living, especially healthcare. In the US, the salaries are higher, but so are their costs. Things like healthcare, insurance, and education costs cost a lot more, whereas in the UK, things like the NHS actually reduce those costs. So part of that higher salary in the US is actually covering expenses that you don't really see here in the UK. And number three, you've got company structure and profits. US companies, especially in tech, tend to generate much higher profits, and they often reinvest that into higher salaries, bonuses, and stock options, whereas the UK companies are generally more conservative when it comes to pay. Number four, you got risk and work culture. In the US, there's typically less job security, fewer protections, and longer working hours, and not to mention that they only have 10 days of annual leave. But in return, you get a much higher salary. And in the UK, you get more stability, more worker protections, and better work-life balance. And five, you've got the currency and market differences. The US dollar is stronger because of its widespread use in global trade, making it a more powerful currency. And generally, the US job market is more competitive globally, which pushes salaries even higher. So yes, US salaries are higher, but it's not a like-for-like comparison. Higher pay often comes with higher costs, higher pressure, and higher risk, whereas the UK tends to offer more stability and balance. But I personally think it's time that we see pay increases across different industries in the UK, because our costs have gone up significantly, but the salaries have barely moved over the past few decades, which is why most millennials can't even dream of owning their own homes. What do you think? Are you happy with
Be more American, said by a British man who spent his whole life being told not to stand out, not to celebrate too loudly, not to get too big for his boots, and then came to a country where the first thing people do when you tell them your dream is ask how they can help. That is not just a salary gap. That is a culture gap, and it is the most important difference of them all. Here is what this video is really about. Britain is poorer than Mississippi. That is a fact. That is the data. That is what the GDP per capita numbers say when you line them up side by side. But the real gap is not in the numbers. It is what Americans believe is possible. In America, a truck driver has a line of sight to 6 figures. A student graduates and earns $80,000. A man arrives with nothing and books a national television commercial in 3 months. In the UK, people work at the same company for 15 years and never get to 2/3 of £100,000. The American dream is not a myth. It is a mindset. 340 million people who wake up every morning believing that today could be the day everything changes. And that belief, that audacious, relentless, unapologetic belief, is worth more than any salary. Drop a comment below. Americans, what opportunity did America give you that you could not have found anywhere else? And if you are British or European, what is the one thing about American wealth and opportunity that genuinely surprised you?